That's the one that Mr. Hughes has restored for the Tank Museum. All the names of people that helped with donations on the back door.
That the gun fires. And the worry was, after World War II, what are we going to do next? Because those tanks seem to be getting bigger all the time. For the Western Allies, at the end of World War II, there's a victory parade in Berlin, and we suddenly see for the first time these whopping great Soviet tanks, the JS-1, 2 and 3. They're huge, great big tanks. And already the West is starting to fall out with the Soviet bloc countries, so we're starting to design vehicles with guns on that are going to have to take on the new enemy, which is potentially the Soviet Union. And we know they've got massive tanks, so we think we're going to need a massive gun. And to lead this parade on now is the biggest ever gun fitted in a direct fire role on the tank chassis. This is never going to go into production, but it is still the biggest one that they've ever used that way. This is it's one of the restoration projects.
M47 pattern. I don't know if I'm allowed round here, but I've come in anyway. Doesn't really matter. Just get out of that man's shop. M47 pattern. You see that in arena. Leopard 1C2. I think that we used for the film Fury. I know they made a couple of
It's better to have tracks for reconnaissance. They're noisy, you can hear them coming, but they can get to places.
Stuart Mark 6.
Destroyers with a bigger gun on a track chassis, that was supposed to take on the enemy tanks. Inevitably they do fight, especially in Tunisia. They go back and they say the idea of having a tank destroyer doesn't quite work, you know, hence we're leading towards that universal tank. But that need as well, as we see at the back there, you might need a specialist tank at certain times. Think of D-Day, think of certain situations.
So, looking at the American vehicles, you've got the Stuart and the Chaffee, both effectively recce vehicles. I don't know, David, do you honestly think, I'm not a great fan of tracked recce, if I'm honest, I think you need wheels.
So, big debate goes on all the time. Is it better to have tracks for reconnaissance?
What I wanted as a kid, a Scorpion tank, because I got an Action Man tank, which was Scorpion tank. When I was a kid, I always wanted one of these. These first came up for sale, they were only about £4,000 or £5,000. Now you're talking nearly £50,000. I'm going back to early 90s.
Get them all the way though. Can't we make it? 432, the venerable 432.
And this is the modern stuff. Challenger CRV. All the different armour on that. They use them for tank recovery and maintenance of vehicles if they blow an engine or something in combat. That's a bridge layer. Mr. Hughes is restoring one at the moment, which is a Chieftain bridge layer. I think that's in partnership with Tank Museum. The Titan bridge layer, part of the modern fleet.
Suitable spot. That could have been done by our own reconnaissance, so a light cavalry regiment. More than likely we're going to ID where we think we can go, and an armoured recce, okay, they have their special reconnaissance, all kinds of measuring sticks, gauges, they're going to tell if it's correct or not. Traditionally they would have been on a CVRT platform, a Spartan perhaps, now more than likely to be one of the Ajax variants or indeed a Warrior. As we've touched on, and we've gone on about, this is a high value target. We are not going to let that go to any form of crossing by itself. Before it's moved, we're going to have a troop of tanks, if we were an armoured battle group, watching this spot, looking out in depth to make sure there's no enemy over there. Move into the crossing, it's going to be protected. It could be 4 warriors, it could be 2 tanks. It depends what we've got on hand. Reinforcing the fact that this is vital. We would rather lose another armoured asset than lose one of these, because we don't have that many of them.
And again, with we always, and again, part of the history, the museum still teaches that idea of what can we learn from the past. The classic situation is always with, we never think we've got enough tanks, but we certainly never have enough armoured engineering variants, do we, sort of thing. So over time, this is something that we have to learn again. We saw the Krav, it's over there with the dozer blade. You know, if you're going in an urban setting, you're going to be needing that dozer blade for so many different reasons now. So the fact of Challenger, we can fit a dozer blade on the front. All this sort of engineering assets can be fightable, will be fightable wherever we're going to fight.
I'm very glad you mentioned the dozer blade, because I was actually part of a, it wasn't really a trial because we successfully did it. This was whilst we were out in Estonia for the first time since I believe Chieftain. We actually fit a track width mine plough onto a Challenger 2. So normally you'd see that on the Trojan, the other T2 variant, the big angry one that clutches up. We managed to put that on a Challenger 2 and have a similar effect. Your point on urban warfighting. Most of the world is going to be living in urban environments soon. Whether we like it or not, we have to be able to fight.
Be alright, try that for off-roading.
I said to the guy, I said, go and ask him if it's an APC. And he was like, shall I? I was like, yeah. Is it an APC? No!
The new Ajax.
It's believed at this stage that it's probably contaminated, but we're looking into that. Lima 42. Sure, send number. Lima 42, give me a call on the other meter. On the flanking formations, 13th Brigade continue fighting in the area of Bedale. However, the enemy is so anyway, wow. Hey, take care of it. You too. How's it going with you? I get the model.
This is the Russian camp.
Russians, yeah.
Or completely right. I want to do it in dog as well. A weapons carrier. I want to use a nice weapons carrier and then Minnesota.
Yeah, it wasn't stuck in
I'll make sure
Yeah, it's an Hotchkiss Jeep.
Oh, so you can actually jump inside.
I think that's an Hotchkiss Jeep, not a Willys Jeep.
That's it. Right, guys. Good stuff. Right. Yeah, wait. Sweaty lips. It's in my pocket.
This is an Irish tank.
I wonder if this is what one that thing is based on.
This is a Swedish vehicle. It was used up until 1982.
As far as smaller. Oh, Jesus, they're rolling.
Love the grill. Smoke box. Little naffy truck. Women volunteer service. Beautiful cakes. If you would, if you could give us a like and a subscribe, because it would help grow my channel. Really need the subscribes and likes. So I'm not begging, but I'd get on my knees if I could. But please, if you would, subscribe and like, I'd appreciate it. Thank you very much. Don't cost you anything.
Yeah, the gate that way you can go in. Alright, thank you.
So he makes all the brews, and then you'll
Before the first one, you have the other one in your arm ready, so you will kind of cradle around, pass it around if other people want to go around. You will fight that, and that's going to be...
I said it!
It's in the trials unit, Army trials unit, so it's always, it's a transformer thing.
Can I get inside it?
Unfortunately not, no.
Are there many tanks here that you can?
Yeah, so once that Challenger 2 does its display around about 10 o'clock, they can't come down the road and get around the arena. So they got one, Challenger 1, Challenger 2, and Challenger 3 go out. Yeah, this will go out later in the day. So, and this is crewed by 4 people. You've got a driver, an operator, and then you've got the commander, and then the gunner just sits in front of the commander.
What does the operator do?
So the operator, he obviously loads the main armament. He also makes sure that the chain gun is fully functional and loaded, and also he's responsible for this, so he's responsible for 3 weapon systems in the vehicle. And the most important thing is making the teas. So he's got the boiling vessel there to cook any meals, make a cup of tea for the commander and the crew, make sure that they're, so he's got a really important job to make sure that the vehicle is functional. And this is a part of the 4-man crew. You don't just work alone. It's not one person just doing the whole lot. We are all working in conjunction to make sure that this vehicle operates as effectively as it can on operation.
What's the missile range?
The missile range?
Yeah, like the normal tank rounds.
So you mean, oh right, okay. So the kinetic energy rounds, which you see down there, the fin stabilised, they can effectively hit a target up to about 2 kilometres. So you're pretty much guaranteed a hit at 2k away. But you can go as far as you'd like. Theoretically, you can probably hit something out to 5 plus.
It's not great again, and then the big column. Then we come in now 10 years later.
Second hand. The engine is from Dutch.
Dan nee, de andere. Nee, de andere. Nee, nog.
This has come over for the weekend from the Netherlands, and it's going to be staying at the Tank Museum till next April. They brought it over on the ferry this week. Challenger 1 main battle tank.
Thank you, Worship. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Board of Directors, our sponsors, World of Tanks, Babcock, Arcadius, and everybody else that's helped out here today, and more importantly, on behalf of my very hard-working staff and volunteers that you'll see around the site, it is my greatest of pleasure to declare this Tank Fest open.
is this. Why is 1203 the most advanced main battle tank in the world?
Thanks, Chris. Good morning, everybody. What I thought I'd do is just talk you through the tank from top to bottom, as far as I can. So if you look at the rear of the turret, there's that large thing sticking up at the back. That is the commander's primary sight. That's one of the key parts of this vehicle. It enables the commander to scan 360 degrees, day and night. And in conjunction with the gunner, who's just sort of front right of him, in conjunction with his sight, they now can do true hunter-killer day and night arc separation, and they can hand off targets to one another as they will. Coming forward, obviously, the gun. It's the L55 A1 120mm NATO smoothbore gun. This means that we can use any standard 120mm NATO ammunition, and that will hugely simplify and improve logistics. Next thing to talk about is the armour. So this is an upgrade of the armour that's on Challenger 2, and indeed the armour that's on Challenger 1. This is the latest version, and is a real British success story, combination of British scientists, investment up in Telford, and the facilities and team that we have there. We'll keep on going on. If we go down into the hull now, there's been quite a lot of talk about nothing having been done to the hull. Well, there has. It's got a much improved power pack, so at lower revolutions it gets much better torque, which will make it a lot more agile and manoeuvrable in tight spaces. The other thing it's got is new Generation 3 hydrogas, which means that the suspension can squash bumps with no trouble at all, and it can put more effort into moving fast around the battlefield. And then the final thing is a small thing to talk about, but this tank now has fitted as standard a reversing camera. You've all got them on your cars, well now we finally have them on the tank, and this will take a huge burden off the commander, who no longer will need to direct the driver when he's moving backwards. Hopefully that's given you a bit of an insight into why this tank is so special. Thanks, Chris.
trenches with the bayonet and the grenade. But the Whippet is faster. The original Whippet, you can go and have a look at one in the museum. It's a very rare vehicle. It's a nightmare to drive. Mr. Cook's, I think, is a little bit easier, but the original Whippet, 2 45 horsepower Tyler bus engines. 2 engines, 2 sets of transmission. I know enough people in their cars who have difficulty coping with one. Only the best drivers could handle the Whippet. It's machine gun armed, and it'll do around about 8 miles an hour. Now this is a replica of a tank called Musical Box. When these things get behind the enemy lines, they cause absolute mayhem. Musical Box ran amok behind the German lines for something like 9 hours, shooting the living daylights out of everything. He's moving a bit slower today because we have infantry following behind. The infantry are using the tanks as a bit of mobile cover, and then you have the other 2 tanks. The tank with the red triangle is a replica of a tank that actually found at a place called Combray, Flequier in a hole, D51 Deborah. She is from the Norfolk Tank Museum. It was a replica built with the aid of and then behind that we have our own, we have the Warhorse tank that was built by Steven Spielberg's team for his. Now, the Germans are opening up, there are rounds coming in. The British infantry have taken cover, they are returning fire. Mortar round drops in. You'll see the infantry aren't stopped. The early stages of the war, they're not advancing in a straight line, they are moving tactically. It's all about fire and movement. More mortar rounds, but the tanks are now closing in. You've got the Whippet, and then the Mark IV female, machine gun armed, and then behind that, the Warhorse tank B-46. That is a replica of a Mark IV male. The female, machine gun armed, the male has 6-pounder guns with secondary machine guns. Now, the infantry are closing. The other thing about it is that British infantry are now better armed. They have a Lewis gun, a light machine gun, so they're able to return a considerable volume of fire. The tanks are moving in, the German army is still, they're still holding their ground. I think they're brave guys. If you've got a 28-ton metal monster bearing down on you, I think you'd want to be out of the way. But at the moment, they are holding their ground, they are in cover. But the male tank, B-46, is closing with them. Another round dropping in. The infantry will start their rearming. Another pan magazine on the Lewis gun. It's got a 30-round pan magazine, so it's an automatic weapon, unlike the rifles, which is of course bolt action. Now the infantry are going to move up and they're going to use the tanks as cover, and they are going to close with the enemy. There goes the Lewis gun number 2. He's going to position himself quite carefully so he can get a decent field of fire. Tanks are opening up. A lot of smoke moving across the battlefield. The German army is now in retreat. I honestly can't say that I blame it. Faced with the company of British infantry, 3 tanks. A company of Lancer, no matter how battle hardened, don't have a lot off the back. Lots of fire coming in. 3 tanks moving. D51 Deborah, as I said, that's a replica of a vehicle that was found buried on the battlefield at Flequier, Combray. And this particular tank, do go and say hello to the crews later. It's a very, very good replica. Internally, just about there. There's the real thing. Infantry moving forward. They've taken the first German positions, they're going to move in on the second. The German army is pulling back. The way it's looking is they're being pushed into retreat. This is another little bit of France liberated. Museum, and the infantry, and I really don't envy them at the moment in serge tunics, they are from the Great War Society.
The south after Operation Cobra. 21st Army Group from the north, mainly British, but Canadians and the Polish do a lot of the heavy fighting at Falaise, eventually squeezing this German pocket. They didn't give up, the Germans, they fought their way out as best as they possibly could. It was still an utterly resounding victory for the Allies, but it wasn't a complete destruction of the Germans. A few did get out. But what we've got for you today is later than that. It is going to be into Germany, 1945. There isn't much left in terms of the German arsenal, so things are being pulled from locations that aren't necessarily frontline units. By this point in the war, that Panzer III in the middle there isn't going to be in a frontline battalion, but it might have been in a training school, and a tank is a tank, and it will be used as such. Out in front of the Panzer III, though, we have an FD-KFZ 222. This is a pre-war armoured car. Again, not really in frontline service by this point in the war, but it is still an armoured car, it is still useful, and crucially for any on-rushing force, that 20mm, or 2cm if you're German, will pack a punch. It's not just the armour, but it's the armoured infantry behind them. The Panzer Grenadiers, they're in their half-track. FD-KFZ 251. I'll let you argue if you want to call it a Hanomag or not, but I'll call it 251. Packed full of troops specifically trained to fight alongside armour, which is going to be a problem for any Allied force, because let's be honest, they're going to have armour support. Behind that, we have a truck, and that may not be particularly exciting, but it is vitally important. The German army was very good in the Second World War at picking things off the battlefield and reusing them. That is in 1937, Citroën U-23. Whether it was pinched off the French army, we're not sure, but they pinched about, well, we don't actually know, but it would have been in the hundreds, potentially the thousands, and they even built them in the Citroën factory, rather begrudgingly, I should say. The French did that for the majority of the war. I believe they built over 6,000 of them. Being towed by that is rather interesting. Again, for 1945, that's not a big gun. That's your Pak 36. That is the standard anti-tank gun of the German army when it entered this war. 37mm is not going to do much by this time. When it went into the Soviet Union in 1941, it was known as the Army Door Knocker, because as soon as it came up against T-34s and KV-1s, well, that's all it really did. It sort of just knocked on the side, and that's not really much more than that. However, it is an anti-tank gun. It will fire an armour-piercing round, and against light armour or flanking shots against light tanks, it's an anti-tank gun. It will do damage. I wouldn't necessarily like to be behind the gun screen on that one though. And following up the pack, we have everybody's favourite, kind of overcomplicated bicycle, the Kettenkrad. You see in the back there, a couple of infantrymen with a rather large anti-tank weapon. That is going to be the real problem for Allied armour. As they were pushing through this period, the Panzerschrecks and the Panzerfausts were really, really problematic. The ambush positions the Germans could get themselves into, hit the flanks of any Allied column, really was causing havoc. You've got to remember, by 1945, the Germans are fighting in their backyard. it would be like the British Army fighting on Salisbury Plain or here on the Bovington training areas. They're going to know every nook, cranny, bush, with a bit of woodlock, divot in the terrain. They're going to know where it is, especially if you end up actually, as the British had to do, fighting their way through training areas. Right, what are they up to? That is a deployment of an anti-tank weapon. They're clearly setting up some sort of rear guard, I reckon. That's the Ketting crowd moving into position. You don't want to get that thing in a firefight, but it's brilliant at dropping troops off and getting out of there again. At this time, you're not going to want to commit all of your force, so the heavier side of this formation is probably going to bug out. Done a bit of reconnaissance, so the ranges are going to be much exaggerated. Terrain, we don't really have any. We have a bit of a hill, and it's a brilliant hill, we love the hill, but it isn't what you're going to be finding in a realistic environment. They're going to be using that terrain, that wood block, hiding as best as possible. Here comes the Allied recce formations. We've got the two extremes of how to do reconnaissance in the Second World War. The utility vehicle, the Jeep, ubiquitous with Allied victory. It is really very versatile. It's quite good at providing a very light, small, nimble reconnaissance tool. It's a marked part, a bit of a override runner, as it were, taking messages to where they need to go. As you can see, I was expecting a little bit of extra firepower on top of it, which may or may not come in handy. Behind it, the other end of the spectrum. A Chaffee, late war, American light tank. Built for that reconnaissance role, it packs a punch though. It is lightweight, there's not much armour, but it is rapid, and it has a 75mm. First American light tank, the M3 Stuart, has a 37mm. That is now the same calibre as the medium tank, the Sherman. It's not quite the same gun. That one was developed to operate off of the bottom of a bomber. But it's a bit more successful with the Chaffee. It is what we're going to see today. Behind that we have a Deuce Manhart. The iconic American truck of this period. Very good at going long distances, transporting, well, basically anything you'd ever want. Today, we have a shed load of infantry in the back. These armoured formations are useless without infantry providing flank security. Oh, dear me. That is the anti-tank gun opening up. The ambush has been sprung. You don't want to hang about in an unarmoured truck for particularly long. British infantry are deploying. They're having to get down, the Germans are pinning them down. If you look up on the map, they've got their second defensive position as well. This is potentially now the British are being flanked, which is, yeah, less than ideal. The fierce firefight is now breaking out. Allied formations can't really move. You're going to have to rely on the armour from now on. You're going to have to force their way through. That Jeep is taking a bit of a risk, but that Chaffee is hoping its armour's going to do the job. That is quite close and personal for a tank. That does appear to be a successful hit. The Pack 36 is still opening up. That Chaffee is now suspiciously quiet, so potentially they've just got very, very lucky with that Pack 36. That truck is not going to hang around in the firefight. It will get blown to smithereens particularly quickly. That is getting out of there, letting the infantry fight the Germans on foot. These two formations have bolt-action rifles. There may be a bit of extra fire support coming. The Germans are dropping something on the British positions. One thing about planning in defensive lines means you can plan in the artillery to come down when you're being attacked. This will all be pre-registered. Now this is quite important. We've brought in reinforcements. Not only the armoured vehicles that you see, the Dingo with its Bren gun opening up, we've got the Stuart M5 with its 37mm opening up. Plus, as you can see, in and amongst that infantry, There is another Bren gun. By this point in history, the entire British infantry unit was built around getting that rapid-firing Bren gun into action. If that Bren gun ran out of ammunition, and as an infantryman, you had ammunition, suddenly the Bren gun had more ammunition. The Germans have fallen back. The overwhelming Allied man material is taking its toll on the Germans. They're falling back, they're going back to their second defensive line. Unfortunately, the Germans have been given a little bit of time to repair. They're now pretty dug in, they've got some nice cover there. This is going to be difficult for the Allies to be able to weed them out. Everybody's trying to keep their heads down. If you listen carefully over the rather large amount of gunfire we've got going on here, you will hear the infantry absolutely screaming at each other, different orders, different movements, where they're going. This is not the time for subtlety. You need to be firing your weapon, keeping that enemy head down while you try to advance through the battlefield. This isn't just the wrecking force anymore. This is a tank battalion, tank regiment coming forward. We've got two chaffies in our arena, which apart from, well, Friday and Saturday, I don't think has ever happened before. With Sherman Fury behind it, that is the most powerful gun on the battlefield. Sherman gets a lot of stick, but in this situation, you probably wouldn't want to be much else. It does appear the Germans are making their move. To quote one of my colleagues, there are three inevitabilities in life: death, taxes, and German counterattacks. This is the German counterattack. If I was the Allied commander, I would be expecting this. We played into that. We knew the Germans would inevitably counterattack. Where, how, or when was the question. While the army moves into position, the infantry are making moves. Because while that Panther 3 isn't necessarily the best tank on the battlefield, it is still a tank on the battlefield. And that 5cm main gun is going to rip a hole through most of what we've got here today. That 20mm on the 222, the armoured car, is going to help with that suppressive fire as well. The infantry are reasonably well protected. They are just trying to make movement. They're using the armoured vehicles as physical barriers occasionally as they move forward. Just as the Panther 3 is getting into a position to fire. Who at? I'm not sure. That is a very large explosion. Oh! Just shots are being exchanged here. A maelstrom of battle. No one really knows who's shooting at who, who's getting the kill. Does it really matter? I don't think it does. You are going to keep firing. Both sides have a reasonably target-rich environment at this point. Because of the enemy armed counter-attack, the Allied armour can't really assist the infantry, so at the moment they're on their own. The Germans are falling back yet again. We are slowly pressing them into a smaller pocket here. They clearly have money. They're getting out of there. This person is just too large. They have in their arsenal at the moment. They're trying to get out. They're trying to leave the battlefield. But Allied armour is mobile. That chappie especially is absolutely rapid. And I'm sure it's not too sluggish either. Does appear we've outflanked them. They cannot escape. And no matter how good that half truck is at moving its infantry around the battlefield, when it comes face to face with a 75mm and a 76mm main gun, it's not going to stand a chance. You can see the infantry are moving around the back to support the Allied thrust forward. You're going to need to keep up with them. You don't want to be isolated. The first Chaffee and the M5 are moving through the middle of the arena to directly support the infantry advance. There's a lot of shooting, but we have flanked them. They cut off their lines of communication, way of retreating. There is no real hope for the Germans at this point. It is now just a matter of when and how. Allied armour is moving around in support. We're going to need to keep them pinned in as much as possible. Armour in this situation is fantastic. It will provide you that mobility, that protection, that firepower to bring the fight to the enemy. But when it comes to wheeling them out of foxholes, in place positions, bits of building that they managed to acquire, you are going to need boots on the ground, infantry moving forward. For many men, it was the case of going in there bayonets fixed. You can see the ground gun being used to great effect over there, really pinning down any attempt of the Germans of moving anywhere. That doesn't mean they're going to give up. They're going to fight all of the way, hopefully try and break out the pocket. Break out the pocket. Being encircled, keep fighting. Any sliver of hope, so the Allies have to be careful. You'll see through the summer, this is a tried and tested method of keeping the enemy's head down, while you're tension point exposed. Even now we've got the lighter armour moving up, that breakdown on the Dingo is going to be helpful. And the Browning on the back of the Jeep there. And at the end of the day, it is a very large machine gun. The infantry may well need picking up as well, so the truck's going to hang around just in case we need a speedy exit. Fury's going to bring herself around just to completely cut off and isolate the German forces here. There is no way they can escape, surely not. All a bit cagey. Who's going to make the move? The Allies don't really have the time to wait for the Germans to try and break out. They're going to have to go in hard. Purple smoke is being dropped. That is for airstrikes coming in. Second Tactical Air Force is an absolutely immense formation that can be pulled upon. Why go in there on foot when you can suck them up with air power and artillery? Smoke, artillery going on, explosions. It is just chaos. But that chaos can be exploited. Infantry are slowly squeezing the Germans tighter and tighter into this pocket. They're bringing every single weapon to bear now. Gotta keep them moving. Panzer III is knocked out. 222 is knocked out. I don't think that half truck's going anywhere either. Oh, they've given up. The Germans are legging it. That's the problem. You may have them surrounded, but pockets of infantry can still escape. I mean, that worked both ways, to be fair. That's exactly what we did at Arnhem. A number of the infantry got out in small groups at night. So clearly the Germans have picked something up, and they're fighting on the Eastern Front as well. What you're going to have to do now, you've got to be really careful when taking this position. The Germans would have booby-trapped it. Almost certainly. They would not give up their ground easily. Those infantry are going to have to be careful, but they are going to have to clear that position. And they're going to have to fight through it. What they don't want to do is hang around in this position for, well, any longer than they really need to. Remember what I said earlier about pre-registered artillery? Well, yes, it's here. So they're going to have a few minutes before the Germans are going to be able to pull down artillery straight onto this position. It means you fight through, potentially even get to the next German defensive line before you can take a breather. Let's be honest, there are no breathers at this point in the war. It needs to be over. We need to keep the Germans on the back foot. So the infantry, they're all getting back into their respective vehicles as quickly as possible. Move on, next objective. This was an utterly resounding victory for the Allied forces, but this is not the end of the war. They will keep having to fight and fight and fight.
Need quite as big a gun, they were saying, and also it was starting to cost a lot of money. The government cancels the project, so it never gets to see action, but still a bit of a wow factor rarity, the biggest one ever put on for direct fire on a tank. We've had the nuclear bomb, they've now built up a really big strategic air force. America takes its foot off the idea of developing tanks. There's a bit of work going on, not that interested, we've got other things to fight wars with. And then all of a sudden, what kicks off in 1950 is the Korean War. And for the first time, the Americans, well, not even the first time, for another time, the Americans are suddenly found wanting. They need kit quickly. They are literally getting World War II tanks like the M26 Pershing tank. They're taking them off Plymouth to reactivate them to send them off to Korea. They've got a couple of tank projects on the go. One is using the hull of the M26 and put a new turret on the top. And we've actually got the tank that comes out there on our mound at the moment, the the M47. They put a 90mm gun in it. So again, back to slightly bigger than the World War II German gun. They put it together in a hurry in the early 1950s to go to Korea. Doesn't work very well. It is not a success. So that as a tank was given away quickly by the Americans. And if you're looking at it there, you might recognise it from loads of war movies in the 50s and 60s. Because basically, they moved straight on to another tank, the M48 instead. Now FV4005, as you see, as it's moving around there, such a big gun, it needs a cradle on the front to stop the gun waving around. A couple of tons worth there, so you don't want that rocking on what's called the trunnions, bits that are holding it in the turret. And it's even got an anchor on the back that they drop into the ground if it was going to fire. Bit of a danger if you fire at 90 degrees from the hull because there's so much recoil. They test it with a loading assist equipment. It's basically not an auto loader, but two-part ammunition, in goes the round, that's rammed in, and then followed by a massive brass case full of the explosive to blast that 183mm round out. The armoured box on the top wasn't really meant for a turret, it was just to house it, to see how big a space the crew would need to actually work on the inside. But as that vehicle goes on, we've got the Centurion now driving around. I mentioned that as a tank that at the end of World War II, compound. And it gives a defence attaché a chance to measure the thickness of the frontal armour on what would be the enemy's tank, potentially, if the Cold War became a hot war, and look at the size of the gun. And it's frightening to say, we are running now the So again, over at Fort Halstead in Kent, they quickly come up with a new design gun. It's going to be called the L7 105mm gun, and they end up using that. They fit it the same size as a 20-pounder. It goes straight on the Centurion, just like this one. And that 105mm gun, with new types of ammunition, can penetrate that T-54, and it's so much better, it actually makes some other guns that are already in service, or even bigger, it makes them redundant. And it is a very effective bit of kit. This time, the Americans, they do a gunnery trial, 6 guns. What one's the best? The British L7 105mm gun. So that's the one they build under license and build it. And the Americans had a new type of armour. They wanted steel with silica glass in between as a sandwich. That was going to be more effective against certain types of incoming rounds. Not ready in time. So that's why you see this whopper now with great big bits of cast iron still on. Great big Now for this generation, they put in a huge crane in the first Gulf War by the US Marines as well. And it was it was a reliable tank, but not particularly exciting for many people. It had got a good gun, reasonable armour, a reasonable reliability, but it certainly wasn't at the cutting edge in any way. And in the end, again, the Americans replaced this by the famous Abrams tanks, and most of these were finally given away. They some went to the National Guard units. So the British gun, in essence, on that tank, and on the side of the turret as well, British smoke dischargers, those funny little banks of tubes to fire out. Heavy tank, the M102. About what would be the best way of knocking out a tank. Most of the time, tank guns, many of them have come from anti-aircraft guns, because the whole idea of the anti-aircraft gun is got to fire at the target way up in the air, so it leaves lots of welly behind the round. With this 120mm gun there, it comes from something called the stratosphere gun. It can fire a round up to 60,000 feet up in the air. So they have a go with that on this enormous casting. 120mm gun. We actually copy that gun from the Americans. We put it on our Conqueror tanks. And that's what's so ridiculous about speed with a 120mm gun on, if you could do the same thing with that British gun. Which is why people weren't in service for it, because it was or put it bluntly, they were done on the American Marines.
You have main battle tanks, and then you have infantry fighting vehicles or armoured personnel carriers.
What we've got coming on to you now is a late 1980s British battle group led by the CBRT Scorpion, followed by the IMB Warrior, the infantry fighting vehicle, and then 2 generations of main battle. Rhine River. That makes total strategic and tactical sense. It is an utterly massive body of water that is going to be extremely difficult for the Soviets to breach. Problem? That basically means sacrificing most of Western Germany to Soviet forces. But once the Germans found in 1960, until the ammunition, fuel and equipment stocks were depleted, and then simulated nuclear warhead would go off, which would signal end X. Problem? Pretty morbid, really, not great for morale. So by the early 80s, this is starting to change. A chap called General Bagman comes in. Initially as division, then corps, then army group commander, and he instills a new level of get up and go with the armed forces, with the British Army of the Rhine. We're not just going to sit there and take it. We're going to fall back and meet the Soviets near the German border. We're going to take fall back. That will be a whole division taking that way. We have 3 armoured divisions and 1 infantry division to play with. That is a large formation. It's not as large as the Soviets, but it is a large formation. That 1st division is going to take that hit. It's going to then fall back through the other 2 divisions. It's made display talk in a lot more detail about Warrior, so I certainly won't steal his thunder too much in that one.
The Soviet plan was relatively simple. The Soviet plan was, as I said, smashing lots of units. More about the Soviet vehicles when they start to move off, so you can get a better look at them. Right, at the moment we have Warrior, the infantry fighting vehicle, which is just heading off. And then we have Chieftain, which is the classic British hit position. When we talk about Leopard, a little bit later, that is a totally different technique, but this is a very heavily armoured and very well armed tank. The thing's been fired, kept pikes, both of Scott heads. So the chief
is why it takes the shape it does. It's angular, it's slab-sided, and it works fantastically. Our Chieftain Mark 10 is upgraded with steel roof. While that is technically a composite armour, it is metal backed with roof. Its fire control system is near enough the same as Chieftain Mark 11, but that mobility really gives this tank the edge. Go out into Desert Storm, what we call Operation Granby in 1991, but it achieved it. That officer corps, that leadership corps, those senior non-commissioned officers.
The performance of Charlie 1 in Granby, the first Gulf War. Having spoken to General Captain accordingly about this, his maintenance record was abysmal, they were short of spares. What happened was an awful lot of cannibalisation to get the vehicles going, desertisation, and then finally following that, they did perform extremely well. They moved for around 350 kilometres in 4 days and did a very good job. Now, looking at the Warsaw packed vehicles, here you have the BRDM2, which is an amphibious scout car. Now, amphibious, that's a word that's going to occur repeatedly. BRDM2, that's an amphibious scout car. See how that and the vehicle behind it, the OT-90, they're both boat-shaped. They are both designed to cross bodies of water on the surface. The BRDM2, it's a scout car, they're used as command variants, anti-tank guided missile variants. This one, quite a jazzy camouflage scheme there, is actually a nuclear, biological and chemical warfare survey vehicle. But the whole thing about Warsaw Pact reconnaissance is it was aggressive. They were going to go forward, probe the enemy, look for weaknesses, suss out the routes by which the main divisions could follow. Now, behind the BRDM was actually altered in the 1990s, and originally it started off with a 73mm Grom low velocity gun in the turret. That's been replaced with a 14.5mm machine gun, which is actually around far more effective weapon. The whole thing about it's an infantry fighting vehicle, so it can take part in combat. The main thing about it, in the back side, everyone's really quite sure what they're all about. But the whole thing is that infantry and tanks work together. Comes out, as the vote suggested, in the early 1970s. To start off with, it's a budget replacement for the T-64, which is too expensive and difficult to build. But the T-72 is an absolute classic of its type. It's actually very efficient indeed. The gun is 125mm, very powerful, but the whole tank itself is. And he said, I can't weaken imagine what you build the tank so big. He's actually contains component parts for 4-metre Storm. That canopy is a Canadian Leopard 1 tank. Now, Leopard 1 is the first tank built by Canopy for it is superb. That's a Canadian one. The other one, just up on the bum, is actually Australian. The third, Leopard 2, is Dutch. A number of miles an hour faster than a Chieftain. The thought here was that tank guns were so effective, didn't matter how much army it hit with, it would not do any good. So the idea with Leopard, speed, mobility, speed as armour if you like. That was the idea, and they weren't going to sit there to hold down, they were going to counter-attack. So as Warsaw Pact columns came across, they would manoeuvre to...
As I sort of said earlier in the World War II battle. It is absolutely fantastic to see multiple vehicles of the same type or a similar type in our arena. Because unless you're on a battlefield or on a training area, where else are you going to see this? This is a tank troop. This is the smallest formation that tanks are going to be moving around the battlefield. And something you may or may not have noticed, they're not subtle. They are now actually stopped. This is why you need smaller, quieter recce vehicles. These things are then going to commit, and there's basically no going back once these things get into the battle. You can hear them coming. I'm sure you can all feel them coming as well. That is the upside of a tank in comparison to anything else. You can stay in a position, in an overwatch position, moving that turret, getting your arcs properly secured. Then you can move off if you need to, or fall back or engage. And it is incredibly lethal ammunition. When Leopard came into service, it gave the British Army of the Rhine a bit of a shock. The combination of the Marder, Germany's infantry fighting vehicle, and the new mobile Leo 2s, when coming into contact with British Centurions and 432s, well, British infantry didn't really come out on top on that one, because Chieftain has lost the firepower advantage. It's not only in service today like Leo 1, it is in production today. Leo 2A7 is being fielded, Leo 2A8 is in production, and the order books are full. If anybody tells you that tanks are obsolete, just look at who is buying tanks in how much numbers. It is staggering. I think if we wanted to buy a Leo 2 for our daily driver, we may wait about 5 years for the first one.
There we are, ladies and gents. That's what's called a neutral turn. You do that on tarmac road, the council are going to be pretty hacked off because you've just handed them a big pile of tarmac and the curbstones from both sides. It is something we do slightly frown upon. But when you look at those three Leopards, you are seeing a considerable amount of tank development from the early Leopard 1, the Canadian, which has been improved in some ways. It's got secondary armour, through to the Australian, the last in the queue. That has had quite a lot more development. It's been up armoured, it's got better fire control. It's still the same concept. Still very much a current main battle tank. It is in service. And we are very, very grateful to them for bringing it there today. That's the old Netherlands Army just showed what it can really do. That's interesting. Victory lap Leopard 2. Bloody marvellous.